Okay, you're all very welcome this evening to this Classics Academy seminar, Sunday seminar, and I am delighted to welcome Dr. Samantha Newington as our speaker tonight. So Sam is a senior lecturer in the Divinity Department at the University of Aberdeen. She studied classics at King's College London and has a PhD from Durham. And her doctoral research explored creation myths from ancient Greece and the ancient Near East. And some of you might know Sam from Latin classes, either at the summer school or on Saturdays. So she teaches Latin for Classics Academy. And today, then, she's going to talk to us about gazing upon Sappho. So over to you, Sam.
Oh, thank you so much, Helen. Firstly, for the invitation and obviously for such a warm welcome. So, this is where I hope technology works. Can you all see my screen?
Yes.
Excellent, excellent. So, a very warm welcome to all of you. I understand that we are a global community coming together tonight with a shared interest, not only in classics, but more specifically in Sappho. So, when I was thinking about this talk, at first I thought gazing upon Sappho, and indeed that is what we're going to do. But part of the focus this evening is going to be poetic competition and excellence of Sappho. So it's not just gazing upon her, but appreciating the ways in which her poetry challenged, some of her contemporaries, or indeed the ways in which there is a bit of a cosmic challenge going on, if not just by Sappho, but indeed Aphrodite and Helen. So the talk tonight is going to be obviously about Sappho's poetry, but in discourse, in the ways in which Sappho presents to us her friendship with Aphrodite, her amour, her respect for Anactoria, and indeed the ways in which I think to some extent she presents us with an alternative view towards Helen as well. So without further ado, let's move forward in terms of the screen. So I'm hoping you can all see my next slide. Fantastic. Now, the reason why I've put the Greek here, because I know some of you are doing Greek, and I just thought it'd be quite interesting just to see, well, what does the text look like in its original language? Fear not, I'm not going to ask anybody to come forward to translate this, because on the next slide, I've done just that. But what I thought was really interesting is the ways in which, and I shall do this evening, which language does provide us with a prominence of meaning and understanding. And so, in a moment, I'm going to come back to this slide just to kind of pick out a couple of grammatical expressions, just so that you can see where my thought bubbles are going. Okay, so let us begin with the translation of the text. Some say thronging cavalry, some say the foot soldiers, others call a fleet the most beautiful of sights the dark earth offers. But I say it's whatever you love best. And it's easy to make this understood by everyone, for she who surpassed all humankind in beauty, Helen, abandoning her husband and that and best of men, went sailing off to the shores of Troy and never spent a thought on her child or loving parents. When the goddess seduced her wits and left her to wander, she forgot them all. She could not remember anything but longing, and lightly straying aside, lost her way. But that reminds me now, Anactoria, she's not here. But I rather see her lovely step, her sparkling glance, and her face than gaze upon all the troops in Lydia in her in their chariots and glittering armor. Please do excuse my slight typo there. I assure you my Greek is probably better than sometimes my English. But anyway, excuse that typo. So what I'd like to do here with fragment one is to unpick some of the ways that in which Sappho is providing us with cosmic challenge. And what I mean cosmic challenge is poetic challenge against other male poetry and I suppose, their poetic emphasis. I would also like to explore the ways in which Helen is being narrated here, and of course, the importance of Anactoria, not but least to exclude, of course, Aphrodite herself. So let's start off with all of that and go back to this fragment 16, which of course we'll be referring to, and later on in this presentation, I'll be looking at fragment 1. So here, when we see the different renditions of the text, these are two alternative renditions of the text, one that I've taken from Campbell and the other that has had enhanced reflection in terms of some of the work of West as well. But the text opens up there that you'll see with hoi, hoi. Now here, that means it's masculine and it means those or some. What Hoy refers to here are the male poets. So, what's the most important thing in terms of the poetry of, say, Homer? And here, this is where the challenge is coming. Sappho is saying in this at the start of fragment 16 that okay, some poets, i.e., like Homer, consider warfare, consider Callis Agathos in terms of the male domain is the most important aspect. But what Sappho does with her poetry says, okay, that may be for some poets important, but not for her poetry. In other words, she's presenting us with a poetic challenge here, looking upon what is important for her as a female poet and from the lens of the women, of which, of course, she is presenting here. For me, that is a poetic cosmic challenge in terms of emphasis of importance. Because for Sappho, can't help but breathe in. I'm a bit of a romantic myself, saying, oh, the most beautiful thing is what one loves. And for Sappho here, what she loves or whom she loves is Anactoria. Similarly, too, we could argue that what is important for Helen is whom she loves too, although I'm going to challenge that emphasis in just a moment. So what we've got then at the beginning there is this idea of the cavalry, soldiers, and indeed at the bottom there we see, of course, Lydian chariots and their glittering armour. That is the radiance of appeal in, or according to male poets. But what we see here with Sappho, the importance, the radiance of the corporeal beauty and the gaze upon of the female self here, the importance of the corporeal presence of Anactoria. Now, of course, here we've got an oscillation between beautification and defilement. In a moment, I'm going to refer to how Helen is both beauty, but also the causation of defilement. So, what we're seeing here in terms of glittering armor is a visual impression of the beauty of warfare. But in actual fact, what we see, and of course through the gaze of Helen, is in fact the defilement of warfare and corporeal beauty that has been set in contrast, of course, to the female gaze here, that upon Anactoria, and indeed, I'll argue, upon Helen herself. But what I'd also like to note here is the ways in which we're also seeing societal challenge. Now, we could argue that in terms of rites of passage, the importance of marriage here. But what we see here is not just poetic challenge, but also the challenge of cultural expectations. Here we see Helen abandon her husband, the best of men. In other words, does Helen have agency here that she is abandoning those cultural confines of expectation by demonstrating some agency by going off to Troy with Paris? Are we to see her being abducted by Paris? Or are we, like we see in Homer's Iliad, to see in actual fact the ways in which Paris is being presented as well in terms of effeminate lens, right? The other aspect that we see here in terms of agency is not just potentially here with Helen, but also the role of Aphrodite. The ways in which, and I'm going to argue not only this in terms of fragment 16, but also in fragment 1, where Aphrodite, as well as drawing upon Jessica Decker, when she says that Aphrodite presents a cosmic challenge to the patriarchal authority of Zeus. Ah, now if I bring in some glimpse of that thought here, is it that Sappho likewise is presenting not just poetic challenge to, if you like, the male poets, but also a societal challenge to patriarchal authority, right? By presenting here through poetry an authoritative voice. And of course, is that how we ought to see Aphrodite likewise? But what I am struck by here is the ways in which there is an importance of memory. That Sappho poetry here is presenting us very vividly a memory of the corporeal beauty and love that she has for Anactoria. Notice here, that reminds me now, Anactoria, but she's not here. But she is here. Anactoria is the one that is absolutely vividly, corporeally present here. We can see, we can visualize her sparkling glance, her beautiful face. We can also see here her lovely step, as if in harmony with the poetic, rendition of this, that we visualize Anactoria there. She's not there, but she is there. She is the animated presence within this extract. So once again, what we see with Sappho here is she's not just challenging the male poets in terms of primacy of corporeal beauty of the female self, whether it be Helen, whether it be to some extent, of course, Aphrodite, but most certainly Anactoria. What she's also doing is celebrating the presence of that female agency through the animation of Anactoria as well. So, what we see through the animation of Anactoria, and indeed the ways in which, although Sappho is presenting a challenge to cultural expectations to be married, loyalty to one's husband, and we see that through the lens of Helen. We also get the sense that Anactoria likewise is against a will, leaving Sappho. Truly, I wish to be dead. She left weeping many tears and said, "Oh, such terrible things we have endured, Sappho. Oh my, against my will, I leave you." It seems the cultural expectation there here that we see as the confines being challenged in, say, fragment 16, here in fragment 91, of course, those challenges become vividly presented to us. But what I would like to do is linger a little bit more in terms of fragment 16 and start to navigate ourselves towards focusing on, first of all, Helen. So what we see here with Patriclopoulos here is a note in this poem, fragment 16 of Sappho. Two seemingly antithetical elements, those of love and war, are fused. So it's almost as if love and war have this intrinsic aspect, of course. Now, love, just as we've seen in fragment 16, warfare is seen through the lens of beauty, poetic beauty, say by Homer. But also we see defilement of warfare through that poetic lens. And similarly with love as well. Love can be both beautiful as well as be destructive. And so here it's really interesting how fragment 16 absolutely fuses those points. But if I may, I'd just like to take a pause just to kind of affirm where I'm going with this talk. So at the moment, what I've done is taken a look at fragment 16 and kind of deciphered some of the features there in the ways in which we see the beauty of poetry. And the beauty of fragment 16 is Sappho's celebration of female beauty and agency, challenging the cultural expectations that are sometimes presented by the male poet, and indeed beyond the poetry itself, and more broadly within the cultural domain. Okay, so here we go. So let me just talk through this. Let's focus on Helen. Now, Helen is known for her beauty. If we were to look at classical reception of Marlowe, Dr. Faustus, is this the face that launched 1,000 ships? She is known for her corporeal beauty. But what I've also argued is the ways in which Helen not only is presented as potentially challenging cultural expectations, but also is indicative of beauty. Is this the face that launched 1,000 ship? But also the cause of defilement. Now, here, this defilement, of course, is likewise a challenge to what Homer has sometimes described in terms of the beautification of warfare. This is what Sappho tells us. Some say glittering chariots, warfare. Of course, warfare is where the hero gains glory, gains immortality through the memory of song. So, what is really striking here is how Sappho draws upon Helen as perhaps a topoi or a character to once again to prompt us to think about Homer or the Homeric representation. Here, of course, Helen refers to herself, and this is from Iliad, O brother of me that am a dog, a contriver of mischief and a bawd of all. I would that on the day when first my mother gave me birth, an evil storm would have borne me away to some mountain. The text continues. What is striking about this aspect is that Helen now is the causation of defilement of warfare. And we see that defilement, of course, not of beauty, but of corporeal defilement if we were to look at the opening lines of Homer's Iliad. It says about seeing a goddess of wrath of Achilles, son of Peleus. But we also hear of the countless souls. We hear of the defilement of the fallen warriors on the battlefield by carrion and by dogs. It's almost here that the beauty of Helen has been the causation of defilement that is very much sitting within the male domain. This to me is intriguing. So once again, if we were to go back to fragment 16, some say glittering armor, say some chariots, we get, Sappho opens up with this vista of the beauty of the Homeric text that talks about of the Trojan War. But also what we are reminded through that is the defilement of warfare and the female threat to the male domain. And this is an example of that being explored here. Now, in terms of further archaic poetry, and I perhaps should have said, I've made an assumption you all know Sappho. She's an archaic poetess. I'll go back to the beginning. But anyway, I shall continue here. So where we have Alcaeus in fragment 42, he says this. Such a story, because of the bane deeds, bitter anguish came to Priam and all his sons. Out from you, Helen, with Zeus, with fire, Zeus destroyed holy Ilium. A different kind was she whom Aegus, Galliant's son, inviting all the blessed to the wedding feast, brought into marriage from the halls of Nereus, a pure maiden, out of the house of Chiron. He loosened the pure maiden's girdle, and love blossomed for Peleus. And the best of Nereus' daughter, in a year she gave birth to a son, best of the demigods, marvel driver of tawny horses. But these were ruined for Helen's sake, the Phrygians and their city. So once again, we've got this text that refers to the genderization of warfare, that the beauty of Helen has in actual fact created the destruction or the threat to male domain. We've almost got a paradox going on there. On the one hand, the ways in which warriors can get clails is through warfare. But here, through the genderization of warfare, i.e., Helen, of course, we're seeing the contrast of beauty in terms of destruction and defilement. But when we saw the mention of Helen in Sappho, where let's just go back just briefly here, abandoning, she says. Helen abandoned her husband, that best of men. She went sailing off to the shores of Troy. Now, here I've posited. Now, is this because Helen has gone because she is pursuing what she loves? Or is it that Sappho is having comment here along the lines of our chaos? Now, I'm going to argue for the former rather than the latter. Because what I'm suggesting here is that what Sappho is doing is challenging those cultural expectations and presenting both Sappho and Victoria through the lens of Aphrodite as well and Helen, sexual independence. Okay. And what we see here is that if that's what Sappho is doing, is it in challenge to say some of what has been advocated here by Alcaeus? Of course, if you like, the cultural expectation of marriage is the union between, say, Peleus and Thetis, creating the great warrior, of course, Achilles, right? That's the expectation. Okay, and what Helen has done and how Sappho is presenting it is that challenge. But what that challenge does is, of course, bring about the upheaval and that upheaval, of course, is the causation of warfare. And that's where we see that challenge to those cultural expectations has culminated effectively in terms of the destruction of Troy. And indeed, going back to the beginning of Homer's Iliad, of course, the countless souls going into Hades. Now, this is a footnote, and just as I was speaking, I can't quite remember who the author is, so do forgive me, I'll follow up by this. But I was struck just suddenly by the mention of Marvel driver of tawny horses. Now, some of what I do, I have an interest in animals and monsters. And there is an instant where we see untamed maidens are seen as Billy. And I just wonder here whether there's that connotation noted here. But anyway, I'm going to have further think of this. I've just shared my thought bubble with you. But anyway, I shall come back to that thought bubble perhaps at a later point in another context. But continuing on then, in the ways in which we see Helen challenging, if you like, bringing about the beauty of heroic valor, but also the destruction of which it begins, that it, ensues. I think is also had here by Simonides, fragments there. Zeus has made no greater evil than this, and she has bound us to them with, and he has bound us to them with unbreakable shackles, since Hades received those who, having fought for a woman's sake, now here what's really striking is that Helen now has become unnamed. She has lost her identity. She is now here just received as a topoi. What is striking, though, of course, is that Sappho presents Helen, gives her her identity, gives her her name back. Notice too how here, okay, we get a mention of Helen. But here it's noted within the context of cultural expectation and challenge. Whereas here, Helen is clearly been dehumanized, I suppose, and presented in terms of the defilement of which warfare, of course, brings. And this is part of the aspect. Now, if we were to go back again and take a look at Alcaeus, here, this is drawn from Miller, and fluttered the heart of Archive, he in her breast, maddened with passion for the man from Troy, the traitor guest. She followed him over the sea in his ship, leaving her child at home and her husband's richly covered bed. A heart persuaded by desire. Many of his brothers the dark earth holds fast, laid low on the Trojan plain, for that woman's sake, and many chariots in the dust. The text continues. Now, in actual fact, I find this text incredibly intriguing, especially if we see some level of alignment with Sappho. I have argued that Helen is showing agency or is being presented as having agency by Sappho fragment 16. She's named, she, okay, has abandoned her husband, but perhaps, as we see here, is because of her pursuit of what she loves, right? But of course, we know if we were to look at Homer's Iliad, Helen is not necessarily flattering about Paris, but here certainly we've got, if you like, an interplay between some of the concepts that we see in Sappho Fragment 16 being iterated here. So, if you like, she has, through what's in her heart, gone in pursuit with Paris, the traitor guest. But what I do find intriguing here now is that if one pursues what one loves, that then this is irrational, maddened with passion. Okay, so there is, if you like, I suppose what Homer would say, that thumos, right? And of course, all that, when we see passion, that meaning, which means wrath, it's right at the beginning of the Iliad, that sense of passion, that sense of wrath, that sense of rage is, in actual fact, the destructive element, the element that could destroy the parameters that bring or hold together humanity itself. So this to me is really quite intriguing. But once again, what we see is the expectation of the wife here, of Helen, leaving her child at home. There she's abandoning the genitive aspect or genitive expectation, leaving her husband's covered bed. So we see, if you like, the defilement of that union. But what we also note is that she is not named explicitly. Once again, this is through the lens, or of course, of the male poet, that she has just been known for her actions. Okay. She's no longer has, if you like, an identity. She's not Helen here. I can't see the words Helen anywhere, but it's that woman's sake. I mean, powerful, very powerful. So what do we have here by way of Helen? Well, it's not only Helen, according to fragment 16, that is challenging or is being posited as a challenge of cultural expectations, prompting us to think about, beauty on the one hand, corporeal beauty not only of Helen, but of course the beauty of the female gaze as well. And this has been set perhaps in contrast with some of what the male poets are looking to achieve. So Jessica Decker argues this. Sappho's fragment 16 invokes the Trojan War, fought with horses and spears, but caused by Eros and Aphrodite's subtle manipulations. So what we then see here is the ways in which the goddess here, Aphrodite, likewise, is challenging the cosmic patriarchal authority of, say, Zeus, and we're going to certainly see that in fragment one, but also the ways in which we could see Helen as synonymous to Aphrodite herself. There can be no righteous anger that the Trojans and well-grieved Achaeans have suffered painful events for a very long time over such a woman. She seems in her look terribly like to the immortal goddess. Here, the sense that, oh, the beauty, the position, the impact of Helen is perhaps similar to that of which we see in terms of Aphrodite. Of course, if we go back to fragment 16, if we look more closely at Aphrodite, of course, she too arguably is the causation of the Trojan War. We all know about the story of the golden apple, for example. Once again, the theme of gaze is certainly noted. But what Jessica Decker also prompts us to think about is the ways in which Aphrodite's erotic power is a threat to Zeus's control of the cosmos, what one loves. If you like, it is that is the threatening element. So is it that Sappho is presenting Helen in terms of her pursuit of what she loves through the endorsement of Aphrodite? And indeed, it's that, as I've mentioned before, that independence of sexuality and identity. The natural fact not only is a threat in terms of Aphrodite of the cosmic order, but indeed, if you like, the cosmological remit of a patriarchal authority, more broadly speaking. If so, isn't that just intriguing? But what we do note is, or are rather, there are a number of mentions to Helen's beauty. And that this is firmly noted, and this is almost me going back, almost in terms of ring composition. The most beautiful woman the gold shining sun has ever enlightened. It is through this divine lens of which I would argue, when reading, of course, Sappho, although Euripides is obviously writing much later, is in actual fact the beauty of Helen, the cosmic, significance of Aphrodite are prominent in fragment 16. But what is most prominent, of course, is the beauty of Anactoria and the ways in which Sappho is trying to challenge those cultural expectations by giving, of course, the female or the voice as a prominent one and within fragment 16. So before I move on to fragment 1, I'd like to refer to Nage. And then there is the luminous radiance from the look of her face. I apologize, another typo. Sorry, folks. I obviously got keen with the keyboard here. This luminous vision of Anactoria, the song is saying, cannot be surpassed in anything in the whole wide world. And the radiance of Anactoria is now directly compared with the radiance of the luminous chariots and the two other luminous foals in the first stanza. Now, we could draw upon it. This indeed, in the ways in which we see the beautification and defilement of warfare oscillating throughout fragment 16. But what is most luminous here is not just the beauty of Helen, or indeed the divine, illustrious beauty of Aphrodite, but to whom one loves. And Sappho clearly is providing here the corporeal animation of whom she loves, and that is Anactoria. But in terms of following on the theme, I feel as if I should give more reverence to Aphrodite. I'm always mindful of this after reading Euripides' Hippolytus and how she comes into the forefront of that staging. I do not want to be accused of any hubris, certainly by Aphrodite. So here we shall linger on once again the ways in which we see female agency and cosmic challenge. And this time, not only just through Sappho, but of course to Aphrodite herself. Immortal Aphrodite, throned in splendour, cunning child of Zeus, I beg upon you, don't subdue my spirit with grief and woes, O Queen. But come here, if ever also on other occasions from afar you granted your ear to my supplications. Leaving your father's golden house, you came. Having yoked your chariot, your beautiful sparrows led you swiftly across dark terrains, whirling their rapid clustered wings. Away from heaven through the middle of the sky. At once they arrived here, and you, O blessed one, with a smile on your immortal face, you asked what? This time whom I'd suffered, and with my frenzied spirit, what I wish most to happen to me. Whom this time shall I persuade to lead you back to their affection? Who, O Sappho, commits injustice against you? And so take it from me, if she flees, she will quickly pursue you. If she does not take your gifts, instead she will give them. If she does not love you, she will quickly, even not wishing. And come to me now, free me from this wretched agony. Whatever my heart too desires to come about in the end, be yourself my companion in arms. Now, once again, just like with fragment one, this is firmly asserting homoerotic love and desire, sexual independence and voice, female voice. We see that being reaffirmed most certainly here, challenging that we've seen in fragment 16, the cultural expectations of marriage and the generative aspect of the female self. Here, that challenge I've firmly presented, I hope, with fragment 16. Here we've got it, of course, with fragment one, where note how Aphrodite is moving across the cosmic plane from heaven into the skies, across to the terrestrial plane to assist Aphrodite to change the course of actions and of course comfort Sappho where clearly she has lost a loved one or it's unrequited love. So here once again presenting the assertion and the importance of desire and what one loves. But I absolutely love this. I don't know whether I should say this, especially as this session's being recorded, but I'm leaning in. So, do you have that one friend that when you see them on the phone come up, you know there's a calamity, right? You know. You pick up the phone and go, okie dokie, click the kettle, put the brew on, I'm on my way. And I love this. There is clearly a love and companionship and equality There's no hierarchy here between Sappho and Aphrodite. They just simply reside in different planes, right? But there's a clear, I'm on my way, click that kettle. Um, but also, we get a sense of self-effacement here. The ways in which, what now? This is not the first time, is it? So this is incredibly witty as well, the ways in which Sappho is presenting this. But please note, though, immortal Aphrodite, we are reminded of mortal and immortal realms. But what I do note here is the ways in which the language of warfare chariot here. Again, an allusion to, I suppose, what could be seen in terms of a male domain. She's using, if you like, that imagery to challenge that male domain and indeed the patriarchal authority of Zeus himself. Furthermore, there is a firm advocacy here of female companionship, not only in terms of whom one loves, but notice, be yourself, my companion in arms. So once again, drawing upon the imagery of warfare, but of course to the beautification of female love. So what we see here, and I've noted time, I better move briskly on. But Buderman in 2018 says this: the song manipulates the common three-part structure of hymns and prayers, invocation, immortal Aphrodite, praise, reminder of past interactions, and or narrative followed by request. And of course, the third element here could be fulfillment. Once again, I would argue that certainly if we were to draw upon the works of Vercinal as well about hymnic and prayer formula, that Sappho, like in fragment 16, is challenging poetic genre. Here, the invocation is not so much a prayer in way we're expecting, but of course using that formula in order to assert agency of the poetic voice of Sappho herself, and indeed the ways in which Aphrodite likewise and indeed is being presented. Now, Sappho does this in a number of ways, and I would just like to refer to this before we close. Fragment 57. Who is this bumpkin, i.e., country bumpkin, is this referring to? Who fascinates you? She trails a hem in a bumpkin robe without the least notion of how to lift it and let her ankles show. Now, here, Sappho, just like in fragment 16, is suggesting not only to gaze upon the corporeal beauty of, in fragment 16, say Anactoria or indeed Helen, but also the female form. Do away with modesty. Why should we confine ourselves to a long draping peplos? No, you hitch that skirt, you show those ankles, and the eroticism of that revelation, of course, is firmly noted. Of course, I would rather gaze upon your dance that we see in fragment 16. Once again, I don't know whether it's subtle or whether it's explicit, we're certainly seeing, of course, Sappho is inviting us to challenge those cultural confines and to express ourselves and to pursue what it is we love. Thank you.